I played every F-Zero game. Here's my thoughts. This is part 1 of a video where I give a broad overview of every single F-Zero game, including some you probably won't expect. But first, I have an important announcement. I've started a Patreon. For those who don't know, Patreon is a platform where you can directly support creators. Joining my Patreon includes a bunch of exclusive stuff depending on the tier, including seeing videos before anyone else, getting to vote on what the next video is, extra video content, behind the scenes stuff, getting your name in the credits, and more. Patreon will help me not only dedicate more time and resources to make better videos, but also increase the scope of my videos so I can do some of the cooler stuff that people have been requesting. I appreciate everyone's support and it means the world to me. There are tons of really cool things that I want to do on this platform, and this will definitely help make those things more realistic. While I don't want to go into all of my specific plans just yet, those things do include dedicating significantly more time to content creation and hopefully eventually hiring an editor so I can get videos out more consistently for you all. Also, even if you can't support the Patreon, I'm still glad you're here, supporting me by just, watching my videos in general. I'm super appreciative of everyone in this community and really thankful I get to make these videos for you all. Again, thank you. Anyways, let's get back to the video. F-Zero is pretty straightforward to understand. It's a series of futuristic anti-gravity racing games released on Nintendo consoles. It's also considered to be one of Nintendo's more neglected franchises. F-Zero is a series that I played a little bit growing up. I wouldn't really call myself a massive F-Zero fan, but I can still appreciate the series for what it is. Alright, let's get into the games. F-Zero was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in Japan in 1990, with a release in other regions in 1991. This is a Mode 7 pseudo-3D game where the goal, of course, is to rank at the top after each race. The controls are super simple. 1 button accelerates, 2 buttons brake, and 1 button gives you a turbo boost called a Super Jet if you're past the first lap. The 2 shoulder buttons shift your vehicle's weight to the left and right, making it easier to make hard turns. Thanks to a super straightforward control scheme, the game isn't really that hard to explain. In fact, just seeing it here is probably enough to understand the basics. There are still a couple of things to mention though. There are multiple pilots to choose from, all with unique vehicles that have their own stats. In this game, there's the Blue Falcon, piloted by Captain Falcon, the Golden Fox, piloted by Dr. Stewart, the Wild Goose, piloted by Pico, and the Fire Stingray, piloted by Samurai Goro. There are 3 modes in this game, keeping it simple. There's Grand Prix, Practice, and Records. In the actual races, the goal is to try to rank as high as you can. However, your vehicle has HP, and ramming into other vehicles, the side railings, and stage obstacles lowers your HP. Losing all of your HP causes your vehicle to explode and you retire early, unable to finish the race. Speaking of stage obstacles, almost every stage has some kind of rough patch that slows you down, or little bumpers that exist solely to trip you up and cause damage. There's also other obstacles, including magnets that mess with your control and tricky aerial segments after hitting jump ramps. All of these minor things, though, mixed in with the other vehicles not really caring about where you are on the track, can lead to small amounts of damage that really causes you problems over long periods of time. With the jump ramps, called jump plates in the instruction manual, you can slightly modify your trajectory. Holding down pitches the nose of your machine up, giving you more airtime, and holding up does the opposite. Some jumps require the use of this mechanic, and unless you read the manual or look it up, there's no real way to know unless you happen to, try it. Also, if you hit a jump ramp and somehow completely overshoot the jump or veer off to the side, you can easily fly off the track and instantly have to retire early. So because it's super easy to accumulate a ton of damage to your machine, there are fortunately these stretches of healing on most tracks called pit runs, usually toward the beginning of the lap line. These heal you only as long as you're on them and without any kind of speed penalty. You can't rely on them too much though, because if you slow down, you might fall behind. After the first lap, you gain access to a boost called a Super Jet, which gives you a big speed increase up to 3 times per lap. While falling behind normally wouldn't be a big deal, each lap has a progressively strict finishing requirement. In the first lap, you have to finish in the top 15. In the third lap, you have to finish in the top 7. In the final lap, you have to finish in the top 3. Otherwise, you're completely disqualified from the race and have to try again. Assuming you have an extra life, which the game's manual calls a spare machine. Also, if you fall below 20th place at any time, you're instantly disqualified too, forcing you to retry. I wasn't sure where to mention this, so I'll mention it here real quick. If you hold down the accelerate button before the race starts, you get a speed boost right at the beginning, but then you have to deal with an immediate speed penalty after that. Also, there's a bunch of machines on the track that aren't actually taking part in the race, and I assume assume that these are mainly here to provide a passive track obstacle at all times for extra challenge. Sometimes though, it almost seems like they're intentionally getting in your way to trip you up, but it could just be my imagination. Speaking of that, it's actually a valid tactic for opponents to come up behind you or to your side and ram you to get you to completely lose your control for a second. While the game does warn you when a machine is directly behind you, it's still sometimes hard to avoid when you're trying to stay on course during a tricky turn, or when you're playing super cautiously to conserve HP. Something else you can find on most tracks are boosters. Running over these gives you a huge speed boost, but you have to be careful because sometimes they'll be in more inopportune spots. That'll cause you to lose control of your machine or ram into a bunch of walls. If you successfully complete a race, you gain a number of points depending on your position in the race. You also get an overview of how long each lap took. The Grand Prix has 3 total cups called leagues: the Knight League, the Queen League, and the King League. You can also choose from beginner, standard, and expert classes, which are essentially the difficulty options. Each league has 5 tracks, though some tracks are set in the same place. For example, every league has its own version of Mute City. Completing a league successfully gives you a large overview of your performance on every track overall, followed by your performance in every cup. This is actually identical to the records mode on the main menu. The only other mode in this game is the practice mode, which allows you to select a course, your machine, and an opponent. Then it works almost like a time trial, actually. The only other machine on the track is your opponent, which is a great opportunity to find shortcuts and figure out how best to approach them without any interference. So real quick, I just want to mention, this game is pretty challenging at times. Most of the footage you're seeing here is me playing on beginner class, because the higher classes are very tough, at least for me. In fact, when I tried the expert class and I fell behind it all in a race, I just started the race over intentionally because it felt almost impossible to catch up. Anyways, F-Zero is still a pretty good game, even by today's standards. Because this is a racing game that doesn't seem to really follow the rules of reality, it still feels pretty timeless. That being said, the controls do feel a bit unresponsive and slidey, but that could have been an intentional design decision. BS F-Zero Grand Prix was released exclusively in Japan for the Satellaview attachment for the Super Famicom. It was released in 4 separate parts. Interestingly, this game is actually pretty much just a remake of the original F-Zero. The Satellaview was interesting because it used satellites to wirelessly beam audio directly to the TV you were playing on. Because of this, you could hear high-quality voiceovers and special sounds and music while you were playing. Sadly, because it was a live broadcast, those features are no longer available and all we have now are just the tracks. This game featured a lot of tracks from the original F-Zero, along with a bunch of new tracks. Some of the parts also included different machines than the ones you found in the original. The Knight League had the Blue Thunder, Luna Bomber, Green Amazon, and the Fire Scorpion. This game also got a sequel called BS F-Zero Grand Prix 2. This version, unfortunately, was less archived and is therefore less documented. The good news, though, is that some of it is still playable today. The bad news is that it looks like 2 of the course themes, specifically Forest and Metal Fort, are just lost to time. Otherwise, it seems as though it was very similar and included some extra remixed track layouts. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it working properly to play it here, but it was functionally and visually identical to BS F-Zero Grand Prix. F-Zero X was released for the Nintendo 64 in 1998. This game is a direct successor to the original F-Zero and it really hit with a bang. The title screen has this sick guitar solo, and then a big rock anthem immediately just slaps you right across your eardrums. It just oozes cool. This game is basically the same concept as the first game, at least on the surface, but fully 3D. That is a game changer. The first thing, though, that I want to talk about is the soundtrack and overall sound design. The music in this game? Stupid good. I have no idea how they made those fake MIDI guitar samples sound so good in a Nintendo 64 game, but wow. There's also an announcer now, and he's always yelling at you and hyping you up. Did you just hit the final lap? Well, you're gonna know about it. The second thing I want to talk about is the incredible sense of speed you get playing this game. Like, yeah, there's a speedometer right on the screen, but just like, look at it. You're moving so fast and it feels super cool. Everything just flies by incredibly quickly, and sometimes there's times where you have to make split-second decisions. There's quite a few gameplay changes outside of the obvious here. For starters, when you select a machine, you can now tweak their speed and acceleration ratio. If you go for higher speed, the acceleration won't be quite as fast. If you go for higher acceleration, then you're limited on the max speed. However, you have to be careful because just cranking the speed up to maximum can be dangerous, because at high enough speeds, it's super hard to control your machine if you're doing like, I don't know, a tight turn. The track design is also pretty different. While there are still long, flat stretches of track like the original game, the tracks now have a bunch of variation, including loops, corkscrews, and even completely different kinds of track, like the big tube thing you race on in Big Blue. Speaking of tracks, when you select the league in the game now tells you the name of the track and also gives you like a little hint description thing as to what you'll find on on the track. Firefield in the King League, for example, says zigzag jump, and hopefully you can see why. A few of the other changes here, the magnets are totally gone. There's a new spin attack thing that can hit opponents and knock them away. Also, boosting is now unlimited after the second lap, but every time you boost, you lose a little HP, so overdoing it can very quickly lead to a loss of one of your lives. Visually, this game doesn't look amazing, but I found out that that's because they wanted to target a constant 60 FPS on the Nintendo 64, which is not a small feat. I think this was the right call because of just how good this game feels to control. I don't know how to describe this to you without you just trying it yourself, but this game controls like super smooth. It's like butter. The controls are super responsive, and I always felt completely in control of my machine. Of course, there's still stuff that can trip you up, but as far as direct control goes, it's top notch. Way less floaty than the original F-Zero. There's also this new feature where you can change your camera angle, and while I thought this was a neat optional feature at first, it's actually pretty helpful for a couple of the tracks. Oh, and there's a ton of machines now in this game, and each one has different stats. This also means that there's a bunch of new characters. Oh, and I want to mention, this game introduces some characters that reference other stuff. While there's a couple of references overall, the biggest one is the racer whose name is literally James McCloud, the same as Fox's dad from Star Fox. His outfit is also very reminiscent of a Star Fox uniform, and he even rocks shades just like Fox's dad. I thought this was super interesting and a fun nod to the Star Fox universe, especially when the games share a lot of terminology and even a similar aesthetic when it comes down to it. The modes in F-Zero X are GP Race, Time Attack, Death Race, Versus Battle, and the Practice mode. GP Race is the standard Grand Prix mode. This mode works pretty similarly to how it worked in the last game, but now you get to continue no matter what place you're in. It uses something closer to Mario Kart's system where you're awarded points based on your position. First place gets 100 points, second place gets 93, and so on. Whoever has the most points at the end of the cup wins, followed by second and third place. In fact, this game actually takes a couple of more cues from Mario Kart 2. Every cup has 6 tracks and there are a total of 5 cups. Well, technically one of the cups is a special case, but we'll get to that. Completing a race gives you an overview of your laps as well as your max speed for that race. The Grand Prix mode is probably the premier mode of the game and can be pretty challenging. There is, however, an unlockable cup called the X Cup. This cup is the final cup and is exclusively made up of randomly generated tracks. In my experience, these tracks have been super basic and don't provide too much challenge, but it is nice that they were testing something like this all the way back in the 90s. Time Attack is a mode with a timed race where you can choose which track you want to play and if you want to play with or without a ghost racer. When you complete a race and record your time and initials, you can choose to redo the race or switch the options like choosing a new track or machine. Death Race is a pretty simple mode where the goal is to take out as many other racers as possible. You can ram them, knock them, spin into them, and do whatever you have to do to stay alive and defeat opponents. It's a decent mode, but I don't know that I could play it more than once or twice without getting bored. I did look into it and it seems like there's a lot of fans of this mode. It just wasn't really for me. Versus Battle mode is, you guess it, a versus race. You can have up to 4 players and it's a split screen race with only the human players and no AI. Unfortunately, I had no one to play with. Well, technically not, but I'll get to that. Practice mode is, you guessed it, the secret stealth release of Half-Life 3. Gabe Newell has a covert team at Valve leveraging time travel technology to infiltrate Nintendo's headquarters and manage to sneak in the full Half-Life 3 sequel we've been waiting for all this time. Anyways, jokes aside, practice mode is the practice mode, obviously. The practice mode is almost like the time attack mode, but in this, all of the AI racers are on the course. You continuously do laps around your chosen course, and the game keeps track of your time per lap. So another thing that I need to mention is that F-Zero actually got an expansion for the Nintendo 64 disk drive. The disk drive was an add-on for the Nintendo 64 that increased its capabilities, and while I won't get into too much detail about it, it didn't do super well, and for that reason, not a lot of disk drive stuff was released outside of Japan. F-Zero's disk drive expansion added in 2 new cups with remixed tracks, a track editor, and a machine creator. So I tried the track editor, and I'm sure it works great, but oh man, do I really need to learn Japanese for these videos. I tried messing around with it, and I ended up getting the most scuffed track ever. As funny as it was pretty unintuitive to use because I had no idea what I was doing. If I knew Japanese, I'm sure it'd work great. The machine creator was a lot easier to figure out. From here, you could choose the front, middle, and rear sections of the machine and mix and match them. Then you could customize colors and also stats. When you choose your stats, you have to keep them balanced. Picking 2 A stats for the body and boost means that I'm stuck with E for the grip, for example. While I was able to create a machine I was happy with, the language barrier, again, meant that I was unable to actually figure out how to use it. It's still a neat feature though, and definitely a teaser for something we'd see more of in the future. The last thing I want to talk about is the Nintendo 64 online version of this game for the Nintendo Switch. So if you have a Nintendo Switch Online membership, you can play this game on your Switch with online multiplayer. While I don't usually play games like this online, I do think it's super novel that this exists. I also just wanted to give it a try because why not? While this is only kind of online play, it works pretty well. The other players are assigned controllers and you play split screen, only they're watching their own Switch when they play with you. Overall though, F-Zero X is awesome. Like, this game has aged like a fine wine. It's not that good looking visually, but it doesn't have to be, and man, it's super fun to play even today. F-Zero Maximum Velocity was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2001. This game, for all intents and purposes, may as well have been the direct sequel to the original F-Zero, at least as far as the style and gameplay go. I want to say right off the bat, I try not to be overly negative when I cover games on this channel. I do my absolute best to give every game a fair shake, and I can't even begin to fathom how hard it is to develop games. As Tim Schafer is quoted saying in Blood, Sweat, and Pixels by Jason Schreier, it's a miracle that any game is made. That being said, wow, this game controls terribly. The control scheme, for the most part, is very similar to F-Zero for the Super Nintendo. The biggest difference, though, is... wait, actually, remember when I said this line? The controls do feel a bit unresponsive and slidey, but that could have been an intentional design decision. I feel like Nintendo was like,
we need a new F-Zero game for our upcoming handheld, the Game Boy Advance. It supports Mode 7 style graphics and we can make a real successor to the first game.
oh, we could do a cool thing where we blend the lessons we learned making F-Zero X into the retro style of a Super Famicom.
No. Know how F-Zero on the Famicom was slidey as f***? Let's crank it up to 11.
This game has all the good stuff about F-Zero on the Super Nintendo, but the controls are just a deal breaker to me, at least the handling is. Even using the machine with the best turn stat, turns feel ridiculously bad. There is a strategy that you basically have to use, where you hold the shoulder button and tap accelerate when you're hitting turns and corners, but that does not completely fix the issue, and if you make a minor mistake, it's pinball time! Listen, I'm sure there's gonna be a ton of people telling me that I'm just bad, and that I didn't understand how to play it or the design intent, but I just didn't like this game. I gave it a good try, but man, I just could not play it without feeling like I was fighting it the whole time or pulling teeth. I don't usually include my live microphone feed when I'm playing these games, but if I did specifically for footage of this game, I'd have to censor so much. In fact, that's exactly what I did. I recorded an entire race on one of the tracks with my live mic feed, which you can find on my Patreon. Anyways, I'm sure there's a good game in here somewhere, but the handling just feels so horrible to me, especially compared to the next game. F-Zero GX was released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2003, and oh boy, this game. If Maximum Velocity was the direct successor to F-Zero on the Super Nintendo, F-Zero GX is the direct successor to F-Zero X on the Nintendo 64. This game feels like a dream to control. Visually, this is a massive upgrade from F-Zero X for starters. The maps now have more detail to them, including varied locations like tall city buildings, long stretches of trees, underwater segments, and even this gigantic Rob the Robot in an industrial city setting. The locations in this game are varied and unique and have a ton of charm. Sometimes, like in the Casino Palace track, there's tons of dynamic elements in the background, but it never gets distracting, if that makes sense. It just looks cool and is some really nice eye candy when you're passing it at insane speeds. The actual machines look way better than they did in F-Zero X2, and there's a bunch of these neat visual flourishes in the game now, like when you hit a boost and a ton of lightning swarms your machine as it gets propelled forward. This game just looks good and has aged super well. It also helps that this game supports widescreen. There's this overarching industrial look to everything, and I think it's super fitting for the kind of game F-Zero is. Also, they did this new subtle thing where the pilots on the left side of the screen aren't just images, but reactive models of the pilots' faces. When they ram something or spin, you can see it happening to their faces on the left side in real time too. The controls are basically identical to F-Zero X, albeit refactored for the GameCube controller. You accelerate with A, boost with Y, brake with B, and you can drift left and right with the shoulder buttons. They also dedicated the Z button to the spin attack, so there's no weird double tapping of the triggers to activate it. This game also has a ton of modes compared to any previous game. The modes are Grand Prix, Versus Battle, Time Attack, Practice, Story, Replay, Customize, and Pilot Profiles. Grand Prix is functionally similar to how it was in F-Zero X. We're back to the points system depending on your place at the end of the races. There's 3 laps per race and 5 races per cup. The cups are the Ruby Cup, Sapphire Cup, Emerald Cup, Diamond Cup, and the elusive AX Cup. I don't really have a whole lot new that I can say about the way Grand Prix works since it's almost identical to F-Zero X's Grand Prix in functionality. Something I can talk about though is the interview question segment at the end. When you beat the Grand Prix, you're able to choose an interview question to ask your chosen pilot, and they answer with full voice acting. It's not mind-shattering or anything, but it is pretty entertaining, and some of their answers are strange enough to get a laugh. Versus Battle is, well, a painful reminder that all of my friends live in a completely different place and have no means to travel hours to play a local multiplayer game with me. I'm just kidding, mostly. The Versus Battle mode, while I didn't get to play it, looks like it plays identically to F-Zero X's with the split screen intact. Time Attack is also like F-Zero X's. You complete 3 laps on any track with any machine you choose as fast as possible. You can save your ghost data and also replays of these races. Saving ghost data, of course, shows your ghost on the track while you race it. Practice mode is a mode where you can choose any track and any machine and run as many laps as you want. You can also change how many AI drivers there are and their difficulty. The laps max out at 20, but you can also set it to unlimited. If you fall off of the course or crash out, you can actually continue after a minor delay, sort of like Lackey 2 in Mario Kart. I think the Time Attack and Practice modes were most useful for me in this game because this game's got a lot more challenging track designs. I haven't really gotten into it too much yet, but for me, this game's tracks are actually really great, and Nintendo knocked it out of the park for me versus F-Zero X's tracks. Yeah, they can be a bit more frustrating at times, but whenever you find out how to hit that super tricky turn just right, there's not really a better feeling. This is the first game in the series to have a proper story mode. This is interesting because F-Zero has a story? Like, yeah, I know the pilots had their own backstories and everything this whole time, but this straight up has fully rendered cutscenes. These cutscenes aren't bad either. They give me real PS1 Tekken cutscene vibes, but with slightly better models. The story is super linear. You essentially go from chapter to chapter. Usually you'll watch a cutscene and then you'll have a mission or race, then you'll get another cutscene afterwards. These scenes are actually pretty high in quality, at least animation-wise, but the voice acting is, it's a bit rough.
You're the famous Falcon. Please, I beg of you, enter the bet race. What? Where? Please, consider it an old man's last request. Just calm down.
Also, I just wanted to point out, the music in these cutscenes is so cool. Like in the so bad it's good kind of way. Like sometimes it's an early 2000s hip-hop beat with some vocals over it, and it reminds me of just the kind of thing you'd hear in like an early 2000s Japanese game, but with even more vocals and cool hip-hop tracks. There's even a song where the chorus is just the word F-Zero over and over, almost like a love ballad. Anyways, back on track. You only have the intro chapter available at first, and to play more of the story, you have to unlock chapters using tickets you earn from playing this and other modes. The gameplay in every chapter is a little different, and only one of them is what I'd consider to be a normal Grand Prix style race. There's one-on-one races, a time attack with a bomb strapped to your machine, and even a death race style chapter. I do have a big complaint about the story mode here though. It is brutally hard. I know I mentioned the game being a bit challenging, but this is hard in almost an unfair way. There's no getting around that. You can argue that I'm just bad, but for once, it's not just me. The AI blatantly cheats right in front of you. Let's use Chapter 2 as an example. The idea is that you're racing Samurai Goro down this canyon as rocks fall. Goro, for starters, has infinite boost. You don't. He also gets a massive head start. When the rocks fall, you kind of have to slow down and navigate around them out of the way. Goro can just drive directly into him and basically propel himself around without losing any speed. How is this fair? Is this fair? No, it's not. And this isn't even close to the hardest level. Don't even get me started on stuff like Chapter 7. I do like that this game has a story mode, but wow, you'd have to really put a ton of time into it to even be remotely good enough to try completing this story mode. There's not even that many chapters, but I wouldn't call this game short because you'll probably be trying to complete a lot of these chapters a bunch of times to do it successfully. The story mode isn't bad, don't get me wrong, don't let that be the takeaway. It's just really hard, for me at least. Anyways, moving on. Replay mode lets you watch replays of any race, assuming you saved them. When you complete races, you you always have the option to save them to your memory card, with the one exception being in the story mode. In the replays, you can watch any machine in the race from basically any angle, including a pilot camera, a rear camera, and even a track camera that allows the camera to stay upright as you watch the machines all go sideways and upside down. There's also an option to change the song that's playing in the replay. Now we're on to the customized mode. This mode includes the shop, where you can buy stuff like story chapters, but it also includes custom parts and items, which plays directly into the other two options in the customized mode, the machine and emblem editors. The machine editor can be found in the garage. Here you can make entirely custom machines or pilot exclusive machines, which just means that you can slap emblems on existing machines. In the machine editor, you can choose the body, cockpit, and rear of your machine from parts that you have unlocked. Different parts have different weight values, which affects your machine overall. After you've selected the machine, you can also select a pilot for that machine. Then you can go into the emblem editor and make a custom emblem or use an existing emblem as a base. Then you can apply the emblems to either a standard machine or your custom machine. For my custom machine, I created a puke green submarine themed machine called The Beauty. Here's some footage of The Beauty in action. Finally, there's Pilot Profile. Oh man, Pilot Profiles. There's a lot of things that I could talk about here. I could talk about how you can look at every machine in 3D and view the model. I can talk about all the character bios, but no, I want to talk about the introduction movies. Every single pilot has an introduction movie that you can unlock. Each one is less than a minute long, but they are ridiculous, and I love them. Captain Falcon saves a baby from getting hit by a train, but rips his pants in the process. You know, like a hero. Octoman flexes his bulging octo muscles in what looks like a bodybuilding show. Blood Falcon does his laundry, but it's still entertaining. I sat down and watched every single one of these videos, and my god, they're all fantastic. Every character also has a theme song, and while I can't play them here out of fear of playing music like that, just know that they're glorious and campy in the best way. F-Zero GX is a fantastic game, and it's the game that turned me into an F-Zero fan. There are very few games out there that feel this good to play. Just one race in, and I was already super stoked. I still like F-Zero X and recommend it, but my top recommendation so far has to be F-Zero GX, 100%. I actually plan to go back to get good enough to complete the story missions on higher difficulties after I finish making this video. It's that good. F-Zero AX was released exclusively in arcades in 2003, kind of. This was pretty much just an arcade version of F-Zero GX with minor differences. On the surface, this version plays identically, albeit I believe there are some differences in the physics and balancing under the hood. While I can't tell the difference, I'm sure there's seasoned players out there who know all the ins and outs. So, for the record, the version that I'm playing here isn't technically the actual game, but it also is? Kind of. Let me explain. So, F-Zero AX was released for Nintendo's Triforce arcade system, the same system used for games like Mario Kart Arcade GP, which you can actually check out in my I Played Every Mario Kart video. To the layman, the underlying technology in the Triforce arcade system is just a GameCube, using special hardware to adapt it for use in arcade machines. However, it turns out most of the features and code from F-Zero AX was actually located inside of the code for F-Zero GX all along, and nowadays can be accessed with a simple cheat code. That's what you're seeing right now. All intents and purposes, this is F-Zero AX, albeit with a couple of minor differences that I don't even know are fully documented. Anyways, getting back on track, this game introduces a bunch of new pilots, which to me is the main draw. What's interesting is that you could apparently plug a GameCube memory card directly into the cabinet to save your data, and also you could upload your custom vehicles from GX. The two modes in this game are Race and Time Attack. Race is similar to the Grand Prix, but you can now choose which track you want to race on, and you can choose a different pilot every time. There's also now a time limit that constantly replenishes as you complete laps. Oh, and the default number of laps is now 4 instead of 3 like the normal game. Time Attack is also identical to the normal game, but it includes the refreshing time limit that we saw in Race mode. You can still save replays and ghost data to your GameCube memory card though. Both Race and Time Attack award you something called Pilot Points, which you can then immediately use to buy pilots and parts. I assume you can then use these in the regular game since it saves the data to the memory card. Overall though, AX is basically just a repackaged GX with some different content, but I do want to try an actual machine someday because it looks like some of them came equipped with extra cool features, like force feedback movement of the wheel and the seat. It is nice that you can access AX with a standard copy fairly easily though. And that's it for part 1 of F-Zero. This series so far has almost felt like 2 parallel series. There's the F-Zero Super Nintendo style games and the F-Zero X Nintendo 64 style games. I have to say though that before this video I was pretty indifferent on F-Zero. Now that I've played a bunch, I am certifiably a fan, but I'll get more into that in part 2. In part 2 I'll be covering not only the rest of the games, but also a couple of extras that may not be as obvious. Anyways, thank you so much for watching and I really appreciate all your support. Also, definitely check out the Patreon. I have exactly 1 Patreon patrons so far. Thank you, by the way. And they got to see this video first. Anyways, again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a fantastic day.